Hi, we're here today to give you our recipe for yard sauce from your garden.
The long-awaited yard sauce, roasted tomato sauce, as you can see on Priscilla's2000.blogspot.com. We've got lots of our heirloom tomatoes that are finally ripening, so now we can make some pans of yard sauce for you. So follow along, and we hope to see you.
So for what you need to make this, you need basil, and we're using two different types. The little leafed Greek basil, and then the regular Genovese basil. An onion, salt, we use kosher salt, pepper, and olive oil. And then if you have any eggplants that are extra or zucchini that are extra, you can also chop that up and put it in there, and then that's a way to get more vegetables into your husband and kids. Not that I would know anything about that, but yes. And then you need tomatoes. We like to use a combination of cherry tomatoes and the big tomatoes because the cherry tomatoes are sweeter. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is add a little bit of olive oil to your pan. That's probably about 2 to 3 tablespoons. And then get the bottom of the pan coated so that your tomatoes won't stick. And you also need to preheat your oven to 425. Then I've washed up a bunch of tomatoes, so I'm gonna chop the big ones, and I'm going to just put the cherry tomatoes in there whole. About 8 pieces for a pretty big sized tomato is good. And then the cherry tomatoes, you just take the stems off and put them in the pan. Okay, so then the pan is full of chopped up big tomatoes and the cherry tomatoes, and now I'm going to chop up half of this onion. It's a big one. You don't have to chop it, but cut it into chunks because all of this is going into the blender. Okay, so that's all set. And now we just need to add some basil. So you just add the leaves of basil in, no stems. About a good handful. Okay, and I'm gonna do one more sprig and then we should be done. All right, that looks good. So now I'm going to sprinkle the whole thing with a little bit of kosher salt. That's maybe half to 1 teaspoon. And then some pepper. Then the whole thing will get drizzled with olive oil. That's probably about a 1/4 cup, maybe a little bit less. You can adjust all this to how you like it after you make it the first time. So then this pan will go in the oven at 425 for 45 minutes. When we made it the other day, it took 65 minutes for it to be where we wanted it to be. You want the top to be brownish but not black so that it's roasted and you get all the flavors from the color. So we'll show you what it looks like when we get finished baking it. Okay, so then while this is baking, we're gonna show you how we make basil cubes to store basil in the freezer for the winter so that you can use it all winter long, so it's like fresh basil. So this is the basil that we got from a few plants in the yard.
So in here we've got lettuce leaf basil, we've got amazel basil, and then Greek basil. So for these cubes, you can mix all your basils together.
So you need one of those old-fashioned ice cube trays, some olive oil, and a little or a big food processor to chop your basil up in.
I've used my blender as well.
You have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what you're gonna do is take off all the stems, so you just have leaves, and make sure it's dry, and then
washed.
Yes, we washed and dry, and we're drying it. But then fill the bowl of your food processor with it. So I have this on a big white clean towel, and I'm just gonna roll it up like you would a sweater that you hand washed to get the liquid out of it.
I like that she said it's a clean towel, just so in case you could use a dirty one.
Yeah, and just whoosh it and get all the water out of it. So then your basil's dry. And voila, you have dry basil. So you stuff it as full as you can get it with the basil. We can add it even a little bit more. And then you're gonna take your olive oil, and what I do is I just go around in a circle like that. So that's probably 1/8 of a cup, maybe like 3 tablespoons. You put the lid on. And sometimes you get these big pieces that you need to shove down. But here's how it looks. It's all chopped up.
It looks like the start of a pesto.
And then we're gonna take a spatula and shove it into the ice cube tray. And then we'll keep going with more basil because we have 7,000 pounds.
Now once this ice cube tray is filled up, we will just plop these in the freezer. Takes a few hours. I usually leave it in overnight, and then I'll have a Ziploc quart bag and just pop them in there. Make sure you label it, because you can do these with other herbs as well. If you wanted to make oregano, or parsley would be probably good too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just label it, and then you can just take one of those cubes and put it in soups, or we'll put it in our yard sauce when we're cooking it for dinner.
Right. So the container's filled again. A little bit of olive oil. That was probably about 1.5 tablespoons or 2 tablespoons, I think. One more batch. I was just telling Chelsea that when I make my yard sauce to go on pasta, I only use a half one of these. I cut them in half. But she said that she uses a whole one. So I guess it's how much basil you like.
I told her I could bathe in it earlier, so.
It does smell really good in here. You need to make sure that you have the separation between the cubes, though, like, don't have it overlapping on the top so that they're easy to pop out.
The last time we made this, we also sprayed the ice cube tray with like a Pam type of spray, and that helped get the cubes out. If you don't want to do that, I just let mine sit on the counter for a couple minutes, and then I used a butter knife to pop them out.
Yes, sometimes you need to use a butter knife to start them, but other times they come right out. So I think it just depends on the mood of the basil. Round 3.
Take 2. She forgot the olive oil the first time.
You have to tell them that, don't you?
Oh, we can't have everybody thinking we're all perfect.
She turns on the camera and I become a blithering idiot. And it's not even a camera, it's her phone.
The camera wasn't even on, you just forgot. So we had a huge harvest to do just because we hadn't done it in a long time. And it'll make maybe 1.5 ice cube trays. So it does take a lot of basil to make these, but basil is something that grows back rapidly after you cut it down. So it's good to use it up.
Mm-hmm. And anything that you make that has basil in it that you're going to cook, like any kind of pasta sauce or whatever, this is so great to have on hand because it's like, it tastes like fresh basil in the winter.
She's pushing down to make sure there's no air
Right.
gaps in the actual cubes.
But it took 3 little mini food processors full of basil to make 1 tray. So these are the basil cubes that I made last week, and this is how they come out of the ice cube tray, and you just plop them into your spaghetti sauce or whatever you're making that you need basil in, and they're wonderful. I use the quart Ziploc bags and just,
Freezer.
right, and fill them up, and they're great. So sometimes when you're trying to get them out of the ice cube tray after they're frozen, it's a little bit hard if you can't twist it or whatever. You just stick a butter knife down the side a little bit and pops them right out. So this is how the tomato sauce looks after an hour in the oven. It's brown on top and it's not as watery, and you can tell that it's done by, and I also let it sit on the counter, or I turn off the oven and let it sit in there for about a half an hour before I try to do the blender because I don't want to get burnt. And we use these Ziploc freezer quart bags to put it in, and each pan will make 2 bags of sauce, so that's 2 dinners for our family.
So let's head over to the
I
blender.
started ladling the sauce, the tomatoes, into the blender, and I'm gonna finish putting the rest of the tomatoes into the blender. So when you get to the bottom of the pan, you even want to use the juice that's in the bottom of the pan. Hopefully I didn't fill this too full. Okay, and there's your yard sauce. This is the consistency you want, just a couple of minutes on the blender, not a ton of time to really pulverize it, and you're all set. And this mixture will fit into 2 of the quart Ziploc freezer. Today we made 2 pans of yard sauce each, so 4 pans total, which gives us 8 meals of yard sauce. And I already bagged one up, and this is a freezer bag, and I lay them down flat in the freezer so I can stack a bunch of them. And this is the second bag, and you just pour it in there and just make sure you get all the air out when you, and I'm gonna have to wipe this bag off too because I spilled a little bit on the outside, but
It's normal.
but there it is, all ready to go in the freezer. Here are our bags of yard sauce ready for the freezer. So when we go to use this for dinner, we'll thaw this out, put it in a pan, and I add a half of one of the basil cubes.
Yep.
Chelsea adds a whole one.
It depends on how much basil you like.
Salt, pepper. I do a pinch of sugar. I also do like a tablespoon of butter, and then the way that is Chelsea's favorite is to use like
Cream or half and half.
Yeah, about a half a cup of half and half in it and make it really creamy. I love that too.
We also usually brown up some meat, so either ground beef or Italian sausage, whatever your fancy is, and just dump it over pasta.
Right. And last week we made this and we had leftover steak, so we did pasta covered with this and then just sliced steak up on the top, and it was so good.
Yep. Mom also makes a really good tortellini soup, and she can take one of the basil cubes, and it's just like going out to your garden in the middle of winter when you want that freshness.
Mm-hmm.
The basil cubes are perfect for that. You can also use other herbs, oregano and parsley, things like that.
These
Do
are
that
also
same
good
thing.
to make that caprese chicken that we make.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
You just
If you don't have
dump it in.
fresh basil, yes, because it tastes like it's fresh.
Absolutely. So we appreciate you tagging along with us today. We're excited to make this. We're excited that our gardens are finally producing.
Right. And if you make our yard sauce, tag us on Instagram and use the hashtag yard sauce.
yard sauce. Bye.